Oh, hello, Will.
Hello, Colleen.
Welcome back to episode 3 of Transylvaniacs, which details two idiots trying to watch as many Dracula adaptations as inhumanly possible.
Each episode, we try to explore every film adaptation of Dracula, from Dracula to Dracula Z.
Nice. I had somebody, so this is, I think, the first episode we've kind of recorded since people have heard our first episode, and I had somebody who is English, like British, ask me, they were like, can you explain the A to Z thing? And I was like, oh, because you say Z, like Dracula Z. And I was like, oh, you don't get that. It's the alphabet, my guy, because we're doing all of them.
Yeah, I have an Irish housemate. I am certain that joke's gonna fall flat with him, too. Sorry, Aaron, for that.
Sorry, it's all right. Shit happens, man.
Yeah, we try.
We try. We really do try. But, you know, sometimes the bits hit and sometimes they don't. I did get a lot of text messages regarding both of us discussing the fact that we were disappointed that Van Helsing wasn't like Hugh Jackman in black leather. A lot of people texted me about that, which is not surprising. I also got a lot of texts about like, wow, you made it 46 minutes without mentioning pegging. So
I mean, listen, that's a record.
That's definitely a record for me. But thanks to everybody who like downloaded this thing. We have a lot more than I think either of us were expecting. We were just kind of like, we'll just put this on the internet and see what happens. But turns out we like have friends and stuff, Will. Yeah,
I know. And I thought maybe like a couple of them would give us a pity listen. But wow, you guys showed up for us.
Fucking showed the fuck up. Pity listen is like so real. Oh, and then I was looking at the stats on our little like podcast hosting site thing, trying to see where people downloaded it from, and then one of them was like Long Lake, New York, and I was like, that's my mother. That's my mother. That's my mother. Shout outs to Camille. I'm sure she will listen to this every week and be increasingly upset with me. But, you know, it's fine. I mean, you said that you had a couple of like older like friends and family members who were like, oh, I want to listen, and I'm like, okay, yeah,
yes,
go with that.
Yeah, just like couple warnings right up front. Gotta get cool with a bunch of things.
Yes, what was that? The John Mulaney, like, yeah, sure, you guys can read my writing if everybody gets cool with a bunch of shit real fast.
Yes, exactly.
I was gonna say, like, I feel like once you hit 30, you're allowed to like tell your parents that you've just been like a horrible miscreant your whole life. Like before 30, you're kind of like, oh, maybe they'll still be mad at me. And then that happens and you're like, oh yeah, Mom, 10 years ago, I got in London. Was technically underage in the United States because I couldn't even make it to the bushes. They can't even be mad at you.
Nope.
Anyway, as you were saying.
So before we get into the official business of Dracula 1931, I have some more business that relates to our first episode. So if you listen to our first episode, we mentioned that there is a passage that was excised from the British edition that was put back into the American edition because it was unsubtly homoerotic, and Bram Stoker figured that America with our Walt Whitmans would be a little cooler with that. So thanks to a friend of the podcast and listener, Adam, we have found that actually Bram Stoker wrote a very intense fan letter to Walt Whitman that he just kind of slept on for 4 years and then sent it out with a second one explaining the first one. And it's something. Can I read you a passage from this letter?
You absolutely can. I would love to hear that.
All right. If I were before your face, I would like to shake hands with you, for I feel that I would like you. I would like to call you comrade and to talk to you as men who are not poets do not often talk. I think that at first a man would be ashamed, for a man cannot in a moment break the habit of comparative reticence that has become second nature to him. but I know I would not long be ashamed to be natural before you. You are a true man, and I would like to be one myself. And so, I would be towards you as a brother and as a pupil to his master.
Oh my god. I wish for like, I will never say this again, but I wish that we're doing video versions of this, because my face during that whole thing was just there's not even a good way to describe it. That was amazing. That is so exactly thirsty in the way that I was expecting it to be thirsty, and yet somehow more.
It goes on. This is one paragraph of maybe 8 here.
Holy shit. But that's such a good excerpt, though. Like, and you can tell, like, having read the novel, like, yeah, that's the same writer for sure.
Oh, yeah.
That's fucking awesome. Thank you for finding that, and thank you to Adam for sending that to us.
Shall we begin with Dracula, 1931?
Yes, we shall. So last week, we not covered up. Makes it sound like it's a fucking conspiracy. Last week we covered the 1922 silent film Nosferatu, which is considered one of the first screen adaptations of the novel, even though it's less of a adaptation and more like a, copyright infringement, unauthorized recreation. Whereas 1931 Dracula is really the first full adaptation that you see on screen with the same characters and very, very similar plot beats. So this film, again, was made in 1931, directed and co-produced by Todd Browning, and it is most well known for starring Bela Lugosi in the titular role. It's also based on a play that was written in 1924, so just a couple of years after Nosferatu came out. So this is an adaptation of an adaptation. But it is considered to be an extremely iconic film, almost 100% due to Lugosi's performance and very little else, as we will get into, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, actually, the Broadway performance that this was based on actually starred Lugosi in...
Oh, really? I didn't know
Oh,
that.
yeah. He was in the Broadway production. He was touring it in Los Angeles when Universal expressed their interest in picking up the rights. And there's a little difficulty. And from my research, I found that Bela Lugosi actually reached out to the widow of Bram Stoker to try and convince her to help out with Universal's purchase of the material. And in spite of that...
Oh, that's super cool.
He still had to fight to get the role. They were still like, thank you for all that. We're thinking of going in a different direction, though.
Wow, that's a fucking dick move. And I'm glad they didn't, because this is such an amazing, mesmerizing, iconic performance that I feel like literally anybody else would have been a huge mistake.
Oh, yeah. As we will definitely get into, I think without him in this central role, this movie would really sink.
Yeah, fucking absolutely. We will get into that. But a little bit about the background of this film. Will, you gave us a bit there about the process for Universal acquiring this. This is a short and sweet little movie. It is about 75 minutes long. Excuse me, let me try that again. This is a short and sweet movie. It is about 75 minutes long, and it was filmed primarily on some sets, which is on the Universal Studios lot in California, and concurrently to filming this, the sets were reused at night for the filming of a Spanish-language Dracula, which was also by Universal, and that's probably what we're going to be watching next, because it's the companion piece and is filmed on the exact same set, but is considered to be a superior film in many, many ways. In 2000, they also added this to the National Film Registry, and the United States Library of Congress basically was like, hey, this is aesthetically significant. So it has become kind of the thing that people think of when they think of Dracula as a visual icon and a film. They don't really think of Nosferatu. They do in some ways, but this is if you were like, okay, what does Dracula look like? Somebody's probably going to draw something akin to Bela Lugosi in this.
Absolutely. I think this is the Widow's Peak, the suave evening wear. It all comes primarily from this movie. It captured the imagination of how Dracula is supposed to look to this day.
Yes, there's so many like tropes that you associate with the entire brand of Dracula that comes specifically from this movie. Like you said, there's the widow's peak and the evening wear, the accent especially, because we haven't had anything before where you hear Dracula speak. But the I am Dracula, that is iconic, and that comes from this. And the cape and kind of the big collar, there's just a lot of signifiers that you get directly from this film, which is kind of funny considering that it came out only 9 years after Nosferatu, but it feels like legions ahead in terms of filmmaking. And you know a lot more about film history than I do. That's kind of more your bag. But some of what we'll talk about a little bit is how, in terms of early sound pictures, there are still a lot of struggles, and that shows, in my opinion.
Absolutely. So it was, in adapting this from a stage play, they keep a lot of the blocking of a stage play, and that I think hinders the film in the eyes of history, but at the time probably made it much easier to film. Early sound movies were very notoriously difficult to record, so there were a lot of static shots. The camera did not move around very much, and the scene played out basically just in the frame. Interestingly enough, because this was really right at the beginning of sound film being a thing, there was a silent version of this movie that was released to theaters that had not yet... there was a silent version of this movie for theaters that had not yet upgraded to sound equipment, so that this movie was still playing in 2 versions at once.
That's really cool. And am I correct that they thought the silent version was lost for a while and then they recovered it like in the 70s or something like that? Or am I making that up?
I think it may be lost. I tried to do just a cursory search for it before this episode to see if I could watch even a bit of it, but I couldn't do it. If anyone does know if it's out there, listeners, please let us know.
I'm curious. Yeah, no, it looks like the Spanish language one was thought to be lost for a long time, and then they found it in the 90s. So this for a while there's basically 3 versions of this film that was created at the same time. 2 of them involving the same cast and 1 of them involving a different cast. But I'm really curious about the silent version. And I kind of like, it's funny thinking about technology and how when you transition from one type of technology to another, there's often a period in time where you get both. Like, we're old. Do you remember when cars had like a fucking cassette adapter for CDs? Like you could plug something in, like plug a Walkman into a headphone jack, and the headphone jack had like a dummy cassette on it, and you could put that cassette in your car. Like that's what this feels like, but for, the entirety of the film industry.
Dracula is the awkward cassette periphery for the iPod of movies.
Yes, 100%. It's also the VHS to DVD crossover. Though I feel like people are getting back into retro tech, and I really appreciate that. I'm done with digital media, man. Please give me something physical. I'm asking nicely. I
feel like I'm drawing the line at VHS as much as I love the aesthetic of it, because it just objectively looks worse. And listen, I get it. The box art was cool, but I mean, also these companies that are putting them out are usually putting them out at a premium, and like, I do not want to pay $40 for a worse looking version of a movie I can see for like 10.
For like $10. I feel like that's kind of the deal with like 90% of vintage anything these days is like, okay, do I want to pay more for something that is, at the end of the day, objectively worse, but it is cooler?
Listen, I live my life by that for the most part, so they got me.
I love that. We're kind of in the same boat. It's one of the reasons I love going to upstate New York is because there's like actual thrift stores there instead of vintage stores. So like we have this really cool clock radio with these like flippy numbers, and I got that off Etsy for like $30. And then I went to a giant thrift store in upstate New York called the Thrifty Nifty, which is like basically a warehouse full of shit where everything is like, I don't know, $1. And I got a wonderful analog clock radio for literally 50 cents. And I'm like, okay, why do I ever use the internet? And why am I spending money on, again, shit that is objectively worse? Anyway, sorry for that tangent. I just had to talk about it for a minute.
So, I know it's pretty close to the film, but do we want to do a brief recap of what happens in Dracula here?
I think we should. So Again, this is a fairly direct adaptation. It is almost exactly what happens in the novel, but cut down pretty substantially. Again, this is a 75-minute runtime. And instead of kind of going through every single little thing, I think it might be good for us to talk about some very key plot differences. I think the first one that we should talk about is the opening kind of third of the novel, again, is Harker at the castle, which most people consider to be the part of the novel that they're going to know if they know everything. That's where you get the diary entries, that's where you get the scene with the brides, you get his escape. And instead of Harker in the film, they actually have Renfield go. What do you think about that?
I get why they do it. I get the purpose that it serves in this version, because you need Dwight Fry as Renfield to go nuts a little later in the movie. Dwight Fry is always great for playing nuts, but I think they needed a little more explanation for how he got there than, I don't know, he's just in our asylum. He's always just kind of weird, got weirder.
Right, and like, it's just interesting to me that they would take Harker is essentially the protagonist of the novel, and that instead they were like, what if we took a side character, gave him the protagonist's backstory, and then made the protagonist somehow even fucking lamer than usual?
I didn't think it could be done. I didn't think the science was there, but wow, we found a way to make John Harker a lamer character.
Holy fucking shit. So, yeah, we get basically an extremely trimmed down version of the first huge piece of the novel, which is Renfield visiting the castle. And then that is maybe 10 minutes of the film. And after that, they're already on the boat, which I believe is called the Vesta in this version. And the rest of the film takes place in England, which I'm sure was mostly for set purposes. And there was a practical reason why they were like, well, people are not gonna watch this if the whole half of the thing's in some smelly old castle that's gonna be really hard to recreate in in our fucking studio. But almost the entirety of this is the sections with Lucy and Mina and Dracula kind of preying on the people of, in this version, which is London. They also really substantially trim Lucy's role. Lucy is an important character in the book. She's definitely a secondary character, but in this, she has a couple of scenes. She dies almost immediately, and then her resurrection doesn't happen until after Mina's already been attacked in this version. So, like, the timeline is kind of changed, and she just has a lot fewer scenes.
Lucy has much less to do in the movie. She gets to hit the same kind of notes of being the one who's a little looser of the two in that friend group, and then immediately is just offed by Dracula. She does get resurrected as a vampire, and it is never addressed what happens to her after they show her wandering out of a graveyard.
Yeah, they did not follow up on that at all. I think one of the major issues with this film is that, again, because it's adapted from a stage play and it's an early sound picture, they have a tendency, and again, this does happen in the novel too, to cut away like right before the action. And that's one of the things that's tricky about the novel, is that we talked about this in the first episode, is you're hearing all of this after it's happened, but that's the beauty of adaptation, right? Like, instead of reading about, you know, Mina furiously writing, oh, and then all this crazy shit went down, we can see it. But they don't do that in this. So we don't really get to see what happens to Lucy. It's just kind of implied at this point that this is a pretty popular piece of pop culture, and you probably know the story, so we'll show what we can, and, like, you'll figure it out.
What's interesting, though, is that really this is the adaptation that made the book enter the public consciousness at the level that it was at. I think before it had that reputation of being that thrilling potboiler, but I think this is really, after this movie, is when it starts to get reappraised as an important piece of culture.
Right, like, and actually good.
Exactly. So even as they're playing fast and loose with the rules, they're making assumptions about people's understanding of the plot they might not necessarily have yet.
And that's, I think, one of the major failings of the film, is that it has to make assumptions due to the limitations of the technology. But like you said, the audience wasn't as familiar yet. Like, that would be kind of like assuming somebody knew every beat of, like, a Doctor Strange comic. But it's like, not everybody knows Doctor Strange. Like, I know what it is, but like, if you showed me the movie and they kept cutting scenes because they didn't have the budget to film them, I'd be like, what the fuck's going on? But yeah, another little plot difference that we can kind of go over before we discuss how successful or unsuccessful this is, both as a film and an adaptation. Major change, and we'll see a lot of this. We have cut almost every side character of our three men who propose to Lucy. We have no Arthur, we have no Quincy. We do have Seward, but in this version, he's Mina's father. Which I guess kind of makes sense for writing purposes. Like, it would be a little harder for them. Like, they wanted him to have a relationship with Mina as opposed to Lucy because Lucy does so little in this version. But as a result, we have really trimmed down the cast, and I don't necessarily know if it's for the better.
No, they just needed a reason to have all of these characters be hanging around the sanitarium directly across from Carfax Abbey, and it seemed like that was probably the fastest route to get there.
Yeah, again, it's like the changes they made were for practical and technological shooting reasons, as opposed to, is it better for the text, you know?
Exactly.
Again, this is a very straight adaptation. The plot differences that we've already gone over. It ends, it's much different than Nosferatu, and the ending of Nosferatu, the Mina equivalent, dies. She does not die in this. We slay the bad guy, again, off screen. But in terms of an adaptation, my major note with this, and this will be getting into our personal review of the film, I feel like this film really just took the fucking wind out of the sails, pacing and plot-wise. It felt like they cut everything about the novel, which again has a lot of stuff that can be cut. It's a long book. There's a lot of things that are repetitive, slow, and unnecessary. But it took all the stuff that made the novel excellent and engaging, intense, cut all of that, and then left a lot of filler. There's just not enough tension in this, in my opinion. And again, some of that comes down to the limitations of the time, but it felt very much like, okay, we will film this scene, and then we will film this scene, and then we will film this scene. And there's like, I just feel like I'm watching a slideshow instead of engaged in a story, you know?
Absolutely. I think part of that can be chalked up to the nature of trying to figure out sound recordings at that time. There's no soundtrack aside from right at the beginning with the title card. Aside from that, it's totally silent, and there's also a lot of space between the line readings, which makes for a movie that has a little bit too much air in it. It doesn't have a tight, quick pace that you would want from something like this if it's going to move as fast as it does. So it feels at once very abbreviated, but also very long.
That is a great way of putting it, because it cuts so much of the action, but the moment-to-moment pace of this movie is, like, brutally fucking slow. And I think you are 100% correct that a lot of that comes down to the fact that there is almost no scoring. And I don't think you realize how much music scoring and even just, like, sound effects add to a film until you've seen one that has these extended, pregnant pauses, especially in a supernatural setting. Like, this is going to be a little nitpicky. And like, sorry that I'm nitpicking about a movie from 1931. But something I kind of love about the silent film era is that because they have the limitation of no recorded audio, the music does so much for you emotionally and also gives the viewer a cue of like what's going on. And the other half of that is that the actors are all obviously very exaggerated. That's like why you have Charlie Chaplin. Like you have to really go out of your way to communicate to your audience using the language that you have available. Something that was really difficult about this is that Lugosi gives such an incredible performance, which I'm sure we'll spend the rest of this fucking episode talking about, and is obviously theatrical because he is a stage actor and commanding and has this huge presence, and a lot of the other actors are kind of strangely subdued. So when you have somebody who's really going out of their way to communicate to the audience what they're doing, and everyone he's playing off against does not communicate that, and you have no cues from the music or even the sound effects, it just winds up kind of like you're watching half of a movie. Like, An example that I'll give is we'll call this Colleen's nitpicking against vampire mind control hour. So Lugosi does these incredible movements with his hands when he is hypnotizing somebody. And in a film that we'd be watching now, we would either get a close-up, some kind of different shot that showed us what was happening, or even like a sound effect to suggest, like a really high violin to suggest that something supernatural is happening. Instead, we just get these cuts back and forth between Lugosi just like feasting upon the scenery and showing us that he's trying to do something, and then like one actor staring blankly. And it's like, okay, if I didn't already know the text, how am I supposed to know what's going on? Like, it really as a film fails to communicate pretty much at every level. And that is kind of depressing. I know that was a very long tangent, but please give me your insight on that front.
No, I think you were very on point there. You actually line up with one of the reviews that I highlighted here from around the film's release. So contemporary reviews, a lot of them, much like the book, viewed it as being a tight, satisfying thriller, but not very much more. The New York Times called it the best of many mystery films. However, John Mosher of The New Yorker was absolutely not having it. And I have a snippet from his review I'd like to read quickly, because I think it touches on some of your notes. Good old Dracula has been filmed now, and somehow it is just a mere soupçon with an unpleasant taste. The old sport himself hops out of his coffin and stalks about in perfect evening clothes, and now and then tries to hypnotize the audience with close-ups of his fiendish glance. He suggests only myopia. This whole vampire business falls pretty flat, though. There is no real illusion in the picture, and it never quite persuades us to imagine what it would be like to have the things meowing around the home. Or do they go tweet tweet? The talkies seem uncertain on the point.
Oh my god, I love that. First of all, great affect, extremely bitchy. I love that, but also like he's right and he should say it.
Yeah. Also, good to know that the tone of New Yorker film reviews has not changed in like 90 years. Good on them.
I just had to like back up from my mic because that got a little cackle from me. Oh, that's so good. Please tell me, you said you had another one. Talk a little bit about some of the other contemporary reviews that we heard at this time.
A lot of them tended to view the picture a lot more favorably, but also a lot of that really hung on Lugosi's performance. So this review comes from Mordenthal of the New York Times. What with Mr. Browning's imaginative direction and Mr. Lugosi's makeup and weird gestures, this picture succeeds to some extent in its grand guignol intentions. It highlights Harker as at least being passable in the movie, which, disagree.
Hard disagree.
Yeah, disagree Mordenthal, but alright.
I mean, like, I guess we should talk about some of the performances then, because, like, my main note, which I know is yours as well, is that unsurprisingly, literally everybody except Lugosi is like a fucking wet blanket. And that's so disappointing. And especially Harker. There are some passable people, like Seward's boring, Van Helsing's boring. Harker is like beyond boring. Renfield is giving me like Willem Dafoe Green Goblin.
Yes,
parts,
exactly.
And I'm okay with that. I'm fine with that. That's cool.
He gives me my favorite non-Lugosi line reading in the entire movie when you have a couple characters who are discussing how to eradicate a vampire, and Renfield, who is supposed to be locked up, just walks into the room saying, "Isn't this a strange conversation for men who aren't crazy?"
Deeply catty, delicious. And he has like the kind of crazy facial expressions, and like it is a type of performance that we're very used to seeing, like nearly 100 years later. But I think it's really fun, and it fits I don't know if I would call it camp, but it fits the aesthetic of the film. Certainly.
Oh, absolutely. Dwight Fry, who plays Renfield in this movie, is a returning player in a lot of the Universal horror movies from this era. He is the precursor to Igor, which is I think called Fritz in Frankenstein, and then plays basically the same character with a different name in Bride of Frankenstein. So they knew they had something in this good and this weird little guy, and they just kept bringing him back for these things.
So yeah, we call that the Columbo technique. We got a weird little guy. We're gonna keep bringing him back. Oh man! And then I guess the other, Lucy again has like two scenes. She was fine. Seward is fine. Van Helsing is very Dutch, and those are really our major characters. And then I guess the main disappointment for me in this is I wish Mina just had like 20% more going on.
Oh yeah, no, she's pretty disappointing, and I think how popular this movie is has hurt Mina's character and people's perceptions in the long run because she truly has nothing going on here. When Lucy expresses that she thinks Dracula's interesting at the beginning of the movie, she's the one who's like, oh, no, I want a good normal man like John. And in classic Arrested Development fashion, after you see John, you're like, him?
Him? Her? Oh man. Yeah, no, you are completely right. Like she's I think one of the more competent actors, and like I'm sure the script does not give her a lot to work with, frankly. It doesn't give any of them a lot to work with because it takes an entire novel and compresses it into 75 minutes, a lot of which is just like spent with pauses between line readings because it was adapted from a play. Like she's fine, but after seeing this, after reading the novel again and realizing that Mina is at her core kind of a badass and very, very smart and is the reason why the group of protagonists sees any success at all. And then having this Mina just kind of be like, oh dear, I don't like the smell of wolfsbane. Like it really dumps her down. It's really disappointing, man.
Yeah, it's really just, it is a disservice to the character in the grander scheme of all of this. I will say her performance gets a little more interesting at the end as she sort of falls under Dracula's spell. She does a lot of really intense eye acting at the end that I think starts to make her performance a lot better, but I mean, she doesn't have any of the agency up until that point. So you're getting a taste of what you could hopefully see in a different version of this movie, but it's too little too late, unfortunately.
Right, exactly. And I'm like, that's why I'm like, I know there's a good representation of this character in there and that this actress, and you'll have to forgive me. Can you pull up her name?
Helen Chandler.
Helen Chandler. I don't know literally anything about her, but I think she is, according to Wikipedia, best known for playing Mina in the 1931 horror film Dracula. Like, I know that there's somebody talented in there. And like you said, the ending part in particular, and like, that was one of the more engaging sections of the movie, mostly due to the change in her. And it's kind of like you said, half of her eye acting and half because they made a couple of really good production choices, like moving her main scene with Jonathan where she kind of tries to seduce him outside. And we've had so much of this movie just be in like the living room of the asylum, and giving her a costume change. She has a dope flapper silky sexy dress on, and you're like, yeah,
I'm looking at your notes
and
you just have Mina's sexy dress with an exclamation point.
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, it's just like, it's also tricky because part of the allure of Dracula and what we're going to see relied upon in a lot of later adaptations is the relationship and the kind of central love triangle, in a way, between Dracula, Mina, and Harker has to be tense, and like there has to be chemistry between all three of them at all times. Whether that chemistry is, antagonism or sexual, pretty much both at all times again, yeah. But the issue here is that pretty much none of them have any chemistry with anyone. And it's so sad because, again, Lugosi is like so amazing. And everybody else just like doesn't really give him anything to work with.
No, they're not at his level. And I mean, I think even if you've never seen this adaptation, or at least you think you know what this performance is. And in spite of that, there's new depths to it every time I watch it, and I find new appreciation for it. There is a scene in this version of the movie where they discover that Dracula doesn't have a reflection. And so Van Helsing holds up this, I guess like a cigar box or something up to him that has a little mirror in it for him to examine. And when Dracula opens it, he just swats the box out of his hand. And shot lingers on his face, and his face has this ferocious, almost animalistic expression that slowly melts back into his suave, debonair face as he regains composure, and it's incredible.
It really is. That scene in particular, I'm glad you pointed that out, because that actually gave me chills. That also, and the very first scene, where he basically opens his coffin and just his hand comes out. This guy's hand acting is like fucking awesome, and I'm sure a lot of that is inspired by Max Schreck and Nosferatu, because that guy also had some fucking stellar hand acting. But his version, especially compared to Max Schreck's kind of more grotesque Dracula, Lugosi's is so subdued and, as you said, debonair, but also with such an intensity under the surface. It just, you can feel it immediately when seeing him. And I think that everybody who was filming this knew that too, because all of the shots, like you kind of mentioned earlier, are filmed like this is a play. You get the whole scene, there's not a lot of movement. But whenever Dracula is on camera alone, I feel like the only times that they made creative and artistic decisions. Like, there's a lot of shots, and you probably know some of them just by cultural osmosis, of Lugosi filmed in a pretty tight close-up with a single eye highlighted by the light and in black and white that just looks so incredible.
They know how to film his face so well. And that becomes, I mean, that sort of flash of light over his eyes becomes really a signature in almost every other vampire movie that he does. Bela Lugosi, if you don't know much about his history, is unfortunately pretty typecast after this role.
Yeah, it's too bad.
And a lot of those movies just use a lot of the same techniques that are pioneered in this movie whenever they're filming him, and it becomes a shorthand for Bela's acting in general.
Which is too bad, because, like, he's obviously really talented, and, like, it's an iconic role for a reason, but he was very, very clearly typecast after this. Kind of going back to the shots, like we mentioned, the direction and cinematography of this is unfortunately very bland, with a few notable exceptions. And some of those that I completely loved was his very first appearance. And there's also one random shot at the beginning of this film where we kind of pull back a little from where we see his coffin opening, and there's just a possum.
Oh my god,
like,
I'm
hanging out.
I'm so glad you mentioned this, because one of my favorite things about this movie is just the animals that they throw into Dracula's castle to kind of be weird and unnerving. There's just like a possum hanging out. I think there's like a bee that crawls out of like a tiny bee-sized casket right when Renfield arrives. There are just like 2 armadillos hanging out in his foyer. It's so funny. It's they're really banking that people just did not know what these things were and just threw anything. They're like, hey, you look kind of weird. Get in there.
Yes, they were like, oh, what will be creepy? And instead of going with the usual, like, I don't know, snakes, they were like, this armadillo thing here looks a little strange. Also, I love armadillos and have a soft spot for them, so I, like, audibly gasped when I saw them.
The thing is, they're really cute, so I don't know what the thought process was. So I think what I really love in this movie is a lot of the set work more than anything else, particularly the sets for Dracula's castle and for Carfax Abbey right at the end are some of the best that you see from this era. The deep shadows, the way that they use matte paintings and built sets is incredible. Just the sheets of cobweb that overhang everything. It's really a shame that more of this movie isn't in Dracula's castle, because I think it's such a beautiful set. You're in that space and you want to spend more time there. That's where the cinematographer Karl Freund, I don't know how this is pronounced, I'm sorry.
Freund, yeah.
That's where he gets to do his best work, because he's not trying to record sound. He gets to do a few more interesting movements with the camera. He gets to pan in on a couple of shots and guide you through the halls of the castle. So that's really where you see a lot of the best work with the cinematography.
Oh, yeah, I do really love the sets. And, like, that's Also, what's so like frustrating about this film is that you see glimpses of it being awesome, but never really consistently. Like you said, the whole last segment, especially, there's one shot where Mina is being taken by Dracula in the Abbey, and Renfield is trying to come up the stairs at the same time, and you see it pulled really far back, farther back than anything else in this film, and it's just so striking. And that compared with the like almost 80s sitcom nature of the sections that take place in the asylum, where it's just like four dudes on a couch.
Four dudes
like,
on a couch.
On a
Four
couch.
Dudes on a couch.
That's why it's like, God damn it. Like there's something really, really brilliant here that is just like consistently tamped down by like boring visuals, boring performances, and boring pacing, unfortunately.
I think, and maybe this is a weird analog to make for this movie, but what I kept thinking as I was watching for this go-round was that it was reminding me a lot of that first Tim Burton Batman movie. And my reasoning is,
yes, holy shit.
Aside from just the obvious parallels with the Gothic stylings, I think those are both movies that are very iconic. They have a lot of elements that have seeped into popular culture. They have one or two fantastic performances, but I think those are both movies that on the whole, you don't really need to watch it. You understand what the iconography of it is, and that's really all you need. You're fine. You don't need to go back and revisit the source.
Yep, I am hard in agreement with you there. Like, I'm sure we'll do less of this as we go on, but in these early episodes, like, kind of comparing this section, like, this week's films to the week before, and, like, this movie feels like filming something that you saw in community theater versus Nosferatu, which feels like an art student's film, which you're not sure if you like it, but it might be kind of good. And like that's my comparison, is whereas this is like just kind of like a really stilted, awkward thing to watch compared to something that was like clearly made with a lot of creativity, even if it doesn't exactly hit at every single point.
Absolutely. And I think it's unfortunate also because this is not reflective of all the films that are made in this era. It's not reflective of all the Universal movies that are made this year alone. Frankenstein comes out this same year and moves at a quicker pace. It is a lot more gripping. It does a lot more with the sets. It is a little more diverse with its sets. The cinematography on the whole is just leagues better. There is a scene in that, and I know we're doing a Dracula podcast, not a Frankenstein podcast, but for compare and contrast, there's a scene where there's a festival going on in this vaguely Germanic town where the movie takes place, and this father who is carrying the corpse of a little girl who's accidentally drowned into the center of town. And there's just this, to this day, chilling scene of watching the celebration that slowly gets muted as this father walks through town carrying this little girl's body. It's incredible. And you're not getting
And that was the same fucking year.
This is the same year. And unfortunately, you're not getting anything that's nearly as affecting in this movie.
Oh, that's too bad. Yeah, I guess, like, this was a tough week, but, like, I'm really curious to see, because what's next for us, again, is the Spanish language film that was on the same set, but at night. And I'm really curious to see if the direction and performances in that are as captivating as I'm hoping.
Absolutely. I've seen it once when I reviewed it back in my Rooster Illusion review days. I'll have to see if this holds up. My take of it was that it was actually kind of the inverse of the English language version, in that the pacing was a little better, the general performances were much better, but Dracula at his center was not as transfixing of a Dracula as Bela is. But I mean, who can be, right?
Who can be? And I guess that segues perfectly into where do we put Bela Lugosi as Dracula on our grand ranking of, at this point, our grand ranking is not particularly grand because there are only a few episodes. But do you put him on par with, above, below Max Schreck? Where do you put him with the novel Drac? What are you feeling?
I love that Max Schreck performance, but I feel like I have to put this above it because this feels at least like a truer version of what Dracula is in the book. Orlok is perfect for what that film is, but you get a lot more of that elegance and menace that you get from Dracula in Stoker's novel, particularly that off-putting intensity that Harker experiences when he is visiting him at the castle.
Yes, absolutely. I'm in the same boat. I love Max Shrek as the the Doug Jones of 100 years ago. But this performance is commanding and literally sets the bar for pretty much every single Dracula that we're going to see from now on. So I'm in agreement with you there. And do you rank this Drac where do you put him on the sexy scale?
I feel like he's up there.
I think he's up there.
I mean, I feel like sometimes like the depth of his sexiness is kind of overblown, partially by Bela himself, kind of puffing up his legacy as he got older. But I mean, I don't know. When he introduces himself to Mina and Lucy and Harker at the opera at the beginning of the movie, and he just starts saying some weird goth shit to all of them. I get why Lucy's like, okay, I fuck with this guy.
Yeah, and then Mina's like, ew. And you're like, no. You gotta get it. But yeah, that's kind of, I guess, our assessment. I think at this point I probably will have either a spreadsheet or a tier list for folks to either interact with or perhaps vote on. We'll see if I'm see how bold I'm feeling. But that brings us to our last two little things of the podcast. The choosing of the notes, and then closing out with a tweet. And it's my week to read a tweet, so I'm excited to torture you. God. What was your out of context Colleen note for this episode?
Oh, I think it absolutely has to be, and excuse my accent here, flower for your butthole, sir.
Okay. That is referring to something which we did not touch on much, which is because they put this version in London, there's a couple of characters who have really ridiculous over-the-top Cockney accents, and this was a little girl who appears in 10 fucking seconds of the movie to try to sell Dracula a flower for his buttonhole, but due to the accent, I just fully heard a little girl go, "Flower for your butthole, sir." I could not fucking do that. Yeah, I also loved your pointing out of the "isn't this a strange conversation for men who aren't crazy?" And I'm hoping to stick a sample of that in there because it's too fucking good.
Please do.
Isn't this a strange conversation for men who aren't crazy? Renfield.
All right, well, we will see you guys next episode with the Spanish language version of this film, and before I let you go, I will read you this week's Dracula Twitter submission.
Oh no.
Which is brought to you by Buffet Breaker. What if Dracula sucked dick instead of blood? Makes you think. And with that, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for listening to this.
This complete horseshit, and we will catch you next time. This is a short and sweet little movie. It is about 75 minutes long. Excuse me, let me